Hello everyone, my name is Mike Harris. I'm the CEO of PREMIOS, and this video today is to give a brief introduction to our in-house tool that we use for planning agile projects and communicating with our clients. We call it PREMIOS Pareto. So to get started, you can see there's a list of recently viewed projects on here that we've done internally. I'm going to create a new one to show how simply we can do this. So we'll give it a project name, and we can change the default story size. I'll come back to the default story size a bit later, but just for now to remember that it's 5 story points. For the particular team that we have in mind for this project, I'm going to give them a maximum velocity of 30 story points per sprint and a minimum velocity of 20. Again, we'll come back to that. And we have the ability, because we know in our planning process who's likely to be on the team for this particular project, we can actually put in there a cost per sprint. I will make it $100 per sprint at the moment, just for an arbitrary value. So I can save those project parameters. Now, when we are actually creating our project, we make this very simple. This needs to be a high-level internal tool, making it as simple as possible so that our clients can understand what we're talking about and what we're presenting when we talk about our agile projects. And so they can understand what they're going to get when. Key issue for our clients is what am I going to get, when am I going to get it? So you'll see that emerges. So the first thing we start with is features. These are features that are input by the business, either by our client inputting the features directly or by us talking to the clients and enlisting these features and working through it with them. So the first thing I'm going to do is to add some features. So first feature name, I'm just going to make it really simple and call it feature 1. And the model assumes that this is a prioritized backlog. So in a prioritized backlog, each feature has a priority. So in this case, it's simply priority 1. We can't allocate the same priority to any two projects. So this one will be number 1. And here you can see that I can create another feature quite quickly with a save and new. So I'm going to create just 2 features for this quick video, and I'm going to give that a priority of 2. Okay, so let's save our 2 features. There's our 2 features. Now, again, this is the business input. This is the business requirement, high-level business summary of what the feature is going to be, and it's as quick as that. Within each feature, we then hand it over to the technology team. So in this case, we've worked with our clients to get the features in. Now it's our development team that are going to look at this and look at the epics that are associated with each feature. So now I'm going to add some new epics. And you can see that my first epic is going to be in feature 1. I'm going to call it, I'm going to call it epic A. And this is where those standard story points come in, the standard size of stories. And so what we're doing here is we're requiring the development team to look at this and say, if all my stories were the same size, how many stories would it take me to build out this epic? And so we put in a minimum story count and a maximum story count. So let's say for this particular epic, I'm going to need somewhere between 3 and 5 stories. Okay, now remember that standardized story points per story. These are 5-point stories. Now I could have made that 1-point stories, in which case my story count might be quite different here. So that assumption about what the standard story point size is for this project is very important. Of course, we can go back and change it, and we can change these as well. But I'm going to do this for now. I'm going to add another epic to feature 1 with a different story count. Now this time we've done this before, this particular epic. We know pretty much what's involved. There's a little bit of customization of some existing code. So I'm going to say that this is probably going to be a pretty solid, this is going to be a pretty solid 2-story count. No uncertainty there. So I'm going to save that. Then I'm going to add an epic C, and in this case there's quite a lot of variance. I'm really not sure what we're going to be doing here. There could be as few as 6 stories, or there could be as many as 10 stories. So let me save that. So now here's my feature 1. It's got 3 epics against it, and I know roughly what the stories are. I'm going to go back to my original features for the project, and I'm going to add a couple more epics for feature 2 so that we've got some data we can look at. I'll do that quite quickly. So here we're going to call it epic D, and let's say the story count is somewhere between 6 and 6 and 8 stories. And then we'll have an epic E, which is somewhere between 3 and 6 stories. Okay, so we've got 2 epics for feature 2. We had 3 epics for feature 1. We don't have any story point summary yet because we don't have the data for it. We can actually go back and look at the dashboard for that. So now if we go back to the highest level of the project, we see the top level dashboard here. Here's my default story size, my maximum velocity, my minimum velocity, my cost per sprint. And now I can have a look and see where my features are coming out. So here's my features coming out with an original estimate of 85 points for feature 1, and a current estimate, because we haven't changed any estimates, of 85 points as well, 70 points for feature 2. If I look at my project sprint count based on my my velocities, I can actually see that I've got between 6 and 8 sprints. So that's a combination of the stories and the velocities. Gives me this for this particular project, for these 2 features, it's going to be somewhere between 6 and 8 sprints based on the current estimates. And now I can look at features delivered by sprint, so I can see what am I going to get and when am I going to get it. So now if I look at the reporting chart here, it doesn't tell me any information, and we haven't sequenced the sprints yet. So we have a separate capability to sequence the sprints, and I can actually allocate stories. Now, if you remember, my target velocity was going to be somewhere between 20 and 30. My minimum to maximum was 20 to 30. So on my first pass on this, I'm going to take the average and say that actually we're going to hit a target velocity of 25 points per sprint and allocate the stories based on that. Now, normally this would refresh in this Salesforce tool every 10 minutes or so. So we're doing it manually for now. Obviously, that's not an issue when we're actually planning. And we can see here that feature 1 will be completed in sprint 4, and feature 2 will be completed in sprint 7. Okay, so that gives us a good idea of what we're going to get and when we're going to get it. Very simple, very basic, but great for communicating with the end client. We can also look at a report of that by looking at all the details. So there's the basic information. We've got the epics, we've got the stories, and you'll notice it's actually created 5 stories for epic A here, based on our profile of how many stories we thought there would be. Okay, now let me go back and just show. If I go back to the demo again and reallocate the stories. Let me go back to the project, to the demo. Go back to the main dashboard, and let's look at this again and see the difference of what happens if I allocate a different velocity. So before I allocated 25, you see that this actually defaults to the minimum velocity. So let's say we don't go to the minimum velocity. Let's say it's much worse. Let's say we go to a velocity of 15. There's lots of problems. We're finding out all sorts of terrible things about the stories. Now I'm going to reallocate the stories and refresh the chart. And you can see now that my 7 sprints has gone to 11 sprints. Again, roughly the same split between the work done in half the number of sprints, but I've got a lot more sprints. So we have this what-if capability to test out the maximum minimum ranges. Yeah, okay, you say you can do a velocity of 30 story points per sprint. What if that doesn't happen? What's that going to look like for me in terms of the number of sprints? So you can see this is the number of sprints along the bottom here. Okay, that's it. So from a preliminary high-level estimate and understanding what you're going to get when, that's all you need to do. Obviously, very high level, it makes the significant assumption it makes is that there's a standard size of stories, and the variability comes from the number of those standard size stories. So with that said, let me have a look at another project which we've done in the past to give you a sense of what this looks like when we actually start to track the project. So we have the ability to go into a story and mark up whether it's complete or not. And you can see here now on our dashboard, we're showing not just the original estimate and the current estimate, but we're also showing how many of those, how much of that functionality is completed. So same charts, you can see here that in this case, we've got, on this project, we've actually got 3 features complete, and the 4th one is a work in progress. Now, in this scenario, sprint 4 is not yet complete. So we can actually track the number of points delivered, story points delivered in a particular sprint by this the line as opposed to the bars. And you can see that we haven't yet we've only delivered half the number of sprints we should be delivering in this sprint because it's not complete yet. That's reflected over here in the sprint cost per point. So you can see that this is where the cost per sprint comes in. So we use that data about the cost per sprint to actually check and see whether the number of how the cost per point is changing and the cumulative cost per point is changing. So we can see here that the cost per point is slightly higher than the cumulative cost per point. So that was a sprint where essentially productivity wasn't as high. The cost, there was a fixed cost, but we didn't get as many points, so the cost per point went up. Here we can see the cost per point has gone up significantly. So what does that tell us? Well, in this case, it's not a meaningful data point because the sprint 4 is not yet complete. So naturally, we haven't delivered as many points as we would expect to, given the target velocity. But the fixed cost has gone in there. So again, it's a simple approach, simple methodology. So at the end of that sprint, we'll get a realistic number for this. So for now, we just need to ignore this number. It's not realistic at this point. Everything else there is pretty standard. But what I'd like to do is just to dig into one of these stories and show how we can set it to be complete. So here's my report directly off the dashboard. And here are all my stories, and you can see here that the story status is complete on many of these, as we saw on the dashboard. But some of these stories aren't complete. So I'm going to go into this story now, which happens to be called View Notes. I'll look at the story name, or the epic is called View Notes. This is a story. The number of story points is the standard number of points. Now I can change that. I have the ability to edit that. This is the standard 5 points, but when we got there, we found it wasn't standard 5 points. It was actually a lot easier than that, so we changed that to 2 points. Again, if I look at this screen, you can see we're using a classic Mike Cohn planning poker numbers, the modified Fibonacci sequence for the number of story points. But now I can say that that this particular story is complete. We completed it. It was only 2 stories, and I can save that. And now we're actually tracking progress as well as planning. So when we go back and look at the plan, we can see that would change it. This particular change of one story by a few points is not going to make that much difference to the overall scheme of things. But you can see how we're tracking as stories get completed and the impact that has on the overall plan. So with that said, I'll quickly go back to the dashboard again to finish up. Just by way of summary, we've got a feature story point summary. We've got a project sprint count. We've got features delivered by sprint, and then we've got sprint cost per point. So with that summary of PREMIOS Pareto, I'll finish this video.